thing with Roger is reminding me of. I didn't experience much of this because it was a business partner of mine named John Fouts, and he did a lot of producing and directing for me for like 10 years. He also sometimes I'd have bring him in. He was a very accomplished filmmaker across the board, right? Sometimes he would come in and run sound, like he would be the actual person, not holding the boom mic, but actually running the sound, like controlling it. He has a soundboard. And he's making sure everything's cool. Sometimes he'd be a DP. He's a really good DP. Sometimes he'd be a camera operator. I've mentioned before, he's the only person I've ever seen who could do a Steadicam without the Steadicam rig. His hands were so fucking steady that it would look like he was running a Steadicam, but he was just running an actual camera just with his steady hands. It was incredible. Great director, great producer. You know, he also wrote, and so most of the time, like that I would shoot something for about a 10-year period, he would be the person I'd work with. And then I branched out. I started working with other people, and just you need to have multiple people. You can't be just working with the same people all the time. You get stagnant, right? And there's a time when I stagnated, so I had to branch out. But during one of my down periods where I was trying to raise money, he would of course do other jobs with other people, and so he got involved with this film he was going to do, and he got the financing lined up. There was a cop who was in a different county, and the cop had arranged things. We shot in his small town. And this cop had arranged everything. We were able to shoot in the fucking house, in the police station. We shot for 2 days inside a police station. We had full access to the complete facility, right? They were doing cop cars. Like, we weren't allowed to drive cop cars, but him and his buddies would drive the cop cars and stuff. We had great production value, right? So he arranged all this for us. And while we're shooting here, he spent a week shooting in a small town, he had a lot of conversations with John, and he was talking about, hey, let's do a film of our own. You know, like, I'll arrange the finance. I know some people. And apparently he knew one of the people who did Blair Witch, right? You know, there's like 3 main filmmakers who did Blair Witch. He knew one of them. So that person was going to arrange the financing. And so they had like $1 million lined up. And so they were going to shoot the same for $1 million. John had done a bunch of pre-production. He had lined up locations. He had done scout work. He had done a shooting schedule. Of course, he wrote a script with the guy. You know, and so he spent several months working on this in pre-production based on this guy's promises. Well, I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. The guy was completely full of shit. He didn't know the dude from Blair Witch, and he completely fabricated all this stuff. Now, here's what I've never understood about this. This has happened many other times. Listen to the Red Dwarf audio commentary one time. The guy who does Red Dwarf, Grant Naylor, or one of them, you know, whichever one who stayed with Red Dwarf after like season 5. He had this guy, supposedly an investor, was going to put millions of dollars into the Red Dwarf movie they wanted to do. And he describes in the audio commentary like how it kept getting weirder and weirder. The guy wanted to come and stay at his house. He's supposedly a millionaire. He wants to stay at his house instead of stay at a hotel. And that's when the guy who did Red Dwarf. That's when he started getting suspicious. So you hear these stories. These are these weird ass stories, right? People just be making shit up. Yeah. But I never knew what the end game was, because eventually you had to come to the day when the money would have to be there. And what do you do then? So what was the point of the 2 months leading up to that, right? Like, what did he get out of this? Like, there must be a level of delusion there. Like, maybe he thought he could raise the money. Maybe he thought he could borrow the money. I don't know. John never found out. But it got to the point where John was like, look, I want to meet this guy. I want to meet the person from Blair Witch. You know, and he was pushing me. He's like, you know, before I move forward anymore, I want to meet this guy, right? And so this cop is like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And so they drive for 90 minutes from where they live to a Charlotte airport. And they're sitting there in the airport waiting for the plane to land. So this guy would come out, he would get off the plane, he would come over, and they would take him away to a hotel and have dinner with him and talk to him that night and shit, right? And of course, there was no guy. It was completely fabricated. And I think, this is the part I can't remember for sure, so I might be making this up, but I think this guy also had phone conversations with the guy in the presence of John. You know, it was like, and especially the day of when they were driving down there, he called him one time. I can't remember if it was just texting. I know he texted. He said he was texting the guy. I know that for sure. I don't think John asked, hey, can I see your phone and see these texts, right? You know. Then they're getting there and they're waiting, and like the plane was like an hour late, and you know, he's like calling around and like trying to find out what happened, where there was a plane, and you know, texting stuff. And that's when John got suspicious. Finally, he's like, okay. So then John did something he should have done 2 months prior, which was a mutual friend of his, me and him knew another woman who was very much in the filmmaking world. She had a lot of contacts. She actually knew one of the people on Blair Witch. And I said there's three, right? This guy over here is the one that the cop said he knew. This guy is the one that this other person knew, right? She knew one of the three. So she didn't know the same guy. Like, if she knew the same guy, he probably would have asked her right away. Hey, you know what he's doing right now, right? But she knew one of the other three, so at least that guy would know what's up with his buddy that he used to work with, right? Because they all kept in touch, right? So she contacted the motherfucker, texted him or something, right? She heard back from him. She's like, man, we've all been in Thailand for the last month filming something. All three of them were apparently like somewhere in Eastern Asia, right? I think it was Thailand. They were actually in Thailand for the last month, all three of them together. And he ain't been talking about any other projects, and he sure as fuck wasn't on no plane, right? And meanwhile, the cop, of course, not knowing the person's real schedule, had said he was like doing something in Europe, and he was flying in from Europe, right? So he might have got lucky if he said China. That would be close enough. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, right? No, he said Europe. So then it all unraveled, right? And I would love to have been there for John cussing that motherfucker out, man. Because he did. And John's a big imposing. He's a really big guy, right? Imposing, muscular, works out and shit. As a cameraman, you got to have the big arms, right? And this cop was relatively small. But he was a cop, right? He was armed. He was still, I think he was still in the police force at that time. He ended up getting thrown out for corruption and shit. Gee, go figure, right? But, you know, he had a gun, and of course, cops have training. Even small-town cops have training and shit, so you don't necessarily want to kick his ass. But, you know, well, you want to kick his ass, you just won't do it, you know? That's the craziest shit. Like, the amount of time this guy strung this out for no reason. Like, my brother was a con artist. I've mentioned this. And they do what's called a long con. They'll spend like 6 months, a year, 2 years sometimes working somebody. Because main reason for usually cons, the way you can stiff them out is people are in a hurry. They want to devote 10 to 20 to 30 to 70 hours in something, make their money and get the fuck out. So if you wait them out, if you delay things, if you put things off, that's how you get rid of con artists. I've done it before myself. That's how you keep from being con. You just push it off. And then if they're con artists, you never hear from them again. You know? Because they're trying to make quick buck. The long con is harder to divide because they're going to spend their time. Because you're worth it. The longer the con, the more money they expect to get, right? So yeah, you can't even put more effort than this into shit. He would have a whole crew of motherfuckers and have, you know, paraphernalia, like props and, you know, these days would be screenshots and websites and, you know, just social media history. He would have everything lined up, right? He would devote hundreds of man hours into a con for a payday. What was the payday here? What was this cop supposed to get out of this? You know? So bizarre. I'm probably just going to do this as a separate sidebar video. I realize that this is already like 8 minutes long. A lot of people won't want to sit through this. But with that in mind, let me just put a little button on this. See, in Roger's case, you can kind of see what the end game was here. Okay, he bought himself a month. Probably got 2 to 3 weeks out of it, right? You know, and then Lee wasn't able to hold it off any longer. I'm surprised he held it off for even a couple weeks. And then we saw him making calls. He's trying to get more new clients and stuff like that, right? And here's the thing. Remember when at the beginning at the end of last season, when they're going to start the new agency, Roger said he can only bring Lee with him. He can only bring Lucky Strike with him, right? That's all he can bring. Because if he brought any of his other clients, then Lucky Strike wouldn't feel exclusive. It would be offended, right? So that means Roger had other clients a couple years ago before they left the old agency. So he's probably calling those people up. And that was probably one of the people who had died. He called and the person was dead or some shit, right? But he's probably calling, hey, man, like, you know, how has it been working out with your new people? Do you want to, you know, you still want to work with me and shit? That's probably what he's trying to do. The end game was, I'll put it off for a couple days, try to bring in new business. So when I get the news to my partners, I can say, I took a couple days lining up these new people. So here's what we have now, right? Here's like $5 million new that I brought in just to kind of soften the blow. They were still probably pretty mad that you didn't tell them right away so they could be doing the same thing those days. But he was trying to soften the blow. But my God, man, you know, it's just where he crossed the line was with the play acting in front of them and shit, like, you know, the fake phone call and shit, which they now know is all pretending you went to Raleigh. that shit, right? So yeah, this Endgame kind of makes sense in a delusional way. He's kind of a broken man. It's really bad news. It threw him off his axis. I get it. I get where Roger's coming from. This other guy I was telling you about, like, what was that Endgame? Like, what was it? I can't wrap my mind around it. John never could either. What was the point? Just trolling the motherfucker for 2 months? I know trolls are out there, right? They just want to fuck with people, get a reaction. I guess. I mean, I don't understand what people get out of that, but like, it's a thing. I know it. But in this case, it's just maybe the dude was just nuts. Maybe he believed his own shit, man. The way he sold it all the way to the end. You know. Anyway, that's enough of a sidebar. Let's get back to the show.